Hi, you're right. Welcome to our introduction to Pythagoras' theorem. Today we'll be learning about the basics to Pythagoras' theorem. This is not a very long topic, but we're going to kind of look at some things about this strange theorem, such as who was Pythagoras, what is Pythagoras' theorem used for, how do we find short sides and long sides, and what are Pythagorean triples, and how do we use that to help us solve problems in maths and life. Okay, so our learning goals for today are to be able to identify the hypotenuse as the longest side in any right triangle, and also as the side opposite the right angle. We want to be able to figure out the relationship between lengths of sides of right angle triangles, as well as using technology, and being able to understand the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. So Pythagoras was a Greek philosopher and mathematician. And after this video, I highly recommend that you have a look online at who Pythagoras was. Pythagoras' theorem is all about finding the lengths and sides of right-angled triangles. But for us to be able to do that, we need to understand what side lengths are, what their names are, and how they relate to each other. So we have this thing called the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is always opposite the right angle. It's the longest side of the right angle triangle, and in this diagram here on the right, you'll see it is the longest side of the right angle triangle. Pythagoras' theorem only works in right angle triangles, and it's opposite that right angle. We call this the hypotenuse. When we want to name sides in our triangles, we use capital letters at their vertices or corners, and the lowercase letters here opposite their capital. So you'll notice opposite capital B is lowercase b, opposite capital A is lowercase a, etc. So we've got two ways to name sides of triangles. One is capital letters and one is lowercase letters. In Pythagoras' theorem, we also need to know about the squares of numbers. So anyway, what is the square of a number? Because we're going to be using this a lot in Pythagoras. Well, the square of a number, as we know already, is that number multiplied by itself. Whereas the square root of a number is the number divided by itself to give that integer or that number. Okay, so just remember, the square is a number multiplied by itself, whereas the square root is the opposite of that. And we looked at that briefly when we were learning about equations in our last topic. So what we're going to do is some examples together, and then, as per usual, you will then go and try your own practice questions. Okay, question 1, it says list all the possible side names in the triangles below in example 2. Okay, so for question 2a, my side lengths could be P, they could be Q, and they could be R. For B, my side names could be XY, YZ, and XZ. So let's take a look at this closer. This side here is called XZ. This side here is called YZ. And this side here is called XY. Whereas in the lowercase one, this whole side length is Q, this whole side length is P, and this whole side length is R. In the next question, we're asked to name these triangles and then to say what types of triangles they are. So in question A, for example, this side length here would be side length AB, but I could also call that lowercase c. This side length here could be called BC or lowercase a. This side length here could be called AC or lowercase b. Similarly for the others, you have a go at those ones yourself. In this picture here, this could be lowercase d, lowercase e, and lowercase c, or we could use the capitals. In terms of types of triangles, well, this one is called a right-angled triangle. This one is obviously called an equilateral triangle. This one here with two equal side markings is an isosceles triangle. Oops, sorry about that. And this one here doesn't have any side lengths equal, so we call all angles, so we call this scalene. Okay, what is a square number? A square number is a number that is multiplied by itself. So for example, if I have 3 squared, this is a square number. Well, this gives a square number, and the square number would be 9. So this number 9 is a square number. It's important for you to know all the square numbers, probably up to 15 or 16. So an easy way to do this is to write them out. Write out all the numbers to 16. And then what you can do is you can write down all their squares. So to write down their square, we do 1 squared, which is 1, 2 squared, which is 4, 3 squared, which is 9, etc. And you can go out and fill them all out. 7 times 7 is 49, 8 times 8 is 64, 9 times 9 is 81, 10 times 10 is 100, etc. 15 times 15 is 225, 16 times 16 is 256. Now you can use your calculator to help you do this. Obviously then, the square root of a number is something under a square root symbol. So for example, if I have the square root of 169, that would be what two numbers multiply it by itself to give that? And that number is 13. So the square root of 169 is 13. In the same way, the square root of 4 is equal to 2. So the square root of a number is the number that you need to multiply by itself to get you the number under the square root. Okay, so in these examples, we're just going to evaluate. Evaluate simply means to find the value of it, work it out. Okay, so 4 squared, that means 4 times 4. Again, you can use your calculators for this. Then we're doing the opposite, square root of 16. 16 squared, use your calculator, but hopefully you'll learn them and it will save you time. Now coming to quadratic equations. Now we've looked at these before. If I want to go from n squared to n, I take the square root, but not just any old square root. I take the plus or minus square root of 9, and this gives me plus or minus 3. In the next question, it's very similar. I take the plus and minus square root of 169, and this gives me an answer of plus or minus 13. So the important things from this lesson are to make sure that you know how to label a triangle, that you know what Pythagoras' theorem is about, where it came from, that you know the meaning of this word hypotenuse, that you know the definition of squares and square roots, that you're able to label sides of triangles and their types of triangles, that you're able to know the square numbers and their square roots, and that you are able to find the value of a pronumeral when it is squared and solve a quadratic equation. So in your summary, you'll want to write down some of these points. So we've talked about things like labeling triangles. We've talked about remembering to take the plus or minus square root when finding n from n squared. Remembering types of triangles. And making sure that you know what the hypotenuse is. Wonderful. Thanks everyone. Hope to see you soon.